I saw that when I was 13 years old, and the reason why it became my favorite film over the years, because whenever I saw the film again, we sought it out. We went to different theaters to see it.
They call Martin Scorsese the keeper of cinema's soul, but he has always been its most restless student. When asked how many films he has seen, Scorsese admits he doesn't know because it's simply too many. This is the man who created blood-soaked epics and spiritual journeys, who transformed violence into poetry and guilt into art. Yet when he talks about the films that shaped him, Scorsese doesn't sound like a master filmmaker. Instead, he sounds like a pilgrim on a sacred journey. For Scorsese, cinema isn't just entertainment. It's communion with something deeper. Like all great believers, his faith was forged by the work of others. The frames that haunted him, the directors who became his saints, and the movies that didn't just influence his work, but actually rewrote his creative DNA. From Italian neo-realism to American westerns, from silent contemplation to operatic fury, Scorsese's 7 favorite films reveal more than just technique. They reveal pure obsession. You can study filmmaking, but you can't study devotion. There's something about certain films that stays with you for reasons you can't explain. Years later, even decades later, when you watch them again, they're different. They've grown with you, or perhaps you've grown into them. These are the 7 films that Martin Scorsese considers his most important influences. Vertigo, 1958. Alfred Hitchcock called Vertigo a story about obsession. Scorsese called it a documentary about his own soul. When he first saw it, he and others responded to the film very strongly, though they couldn't really explain why. They couldn't tell what was happening exactly, but they went with the picture completely. Vertigo wasn't just a thriller. It was a fever dream about the madness of trying to reshape reality into your perfect vision. For a filmmaker who would spend his career exploring the thin line between love and control, it became like scripture written in shadow and light. The story seemed simple enough. A detective falls for a woman who may not exist. But Hitchcock's genius was in the spiral, the way obsession becomes creation, which then becomes destruction. Jimmy Stewart's character, Scotty Ferguson, doesn't just love Kim Novak's Madeline. He rebuilds her, sculpts her, and demands she become his fantasy, even if it kills her. Scorsese first saw this film as a teenager and couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. The vertigo wasn't just Stewart's fear of heights. It was the dizzying realization that love could be a form of violence, and that the camera itself could become complicit in voyeurism. You can see Vertigo's influence in every Scorsese film about men who mistake possession for passion. Travis Bickle's obsession with Betsy in Taxi Driver, Jake LaMotta's jealous rage in Raging Bull, Jordan Belfort's need to control everything he touches in The Wolf of Wall Street. Even the famous dolly zoom that Hitchcock invented, that sickening pull focus that makes the world seem to collapse, became one of Scorsese's signature moves. Vertigo taught Scorsese that cinema could be about the act of looking at itself, that the camera could make audiences complicit in the character's madness. Sometimes the most beautiful films are the most disturbing ones, and sometimes the greatest love stories are actually horror movies in disguise. The Red Shoes, 1948. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger didn't just make a movie about ballet with the red shoes. They made ballet out of movies. For young Scorsese, watching Moira Shearer dance herself to death, it was the first time he understood that cinema could move like music, think like painting, and hurt like religion. The story haunted him, a dancer torn between love and art, between life and the thing that makes life worth living. But it wasn't the story that rewrote Scorsese's understanding of cinema. It was the way they told it. The camera didn't just watch the dance. It became the dance. Colors seemed to bleed off the screen. Movement defied gravity. Scorsese called it his first masterclass in visual storytelling. Every tracking shot in Goodfellas carries DNA from the Red Shoes. The way the camera glides through the Copacabana nightclub, the way it follows Henry through his cocaine-fueled paranoia, that's Powell and Pressburger filtered through Little Italy. The Red Shoes taught Scorsese that movies could be paintings in motion, that they could make you feel things you didn't have words for. Some films don't just entertain you, they possess you. The film's central tragedy, the artist who destroys herself for her art, became a recurring theme in Scorsese's work. From Jake LaMotta's self-destructive perfectionism to Jordan Belfort's compulsive excess, Scorsese learned that the most compelling characters are those who choose their obsessions over their happiness. The red shoes didn't just influence his camera movements. It taught him that cinema's greatest power lies in its ability to make destruction beautiful. The Leopard, 1963. Luchino Visconti understood something most directors never learn, that the most devastating violence isn't a gunshot, but time itself. The Leopard wasn't just about the end of aristocracy in 19th century Sicily. It was about watching entire worlds die with dignity. For Scorsese, who was raised in the dying world of Little Italy, The Leopard felt like prophecy. Burt Lancaster's Prince Selina watches his Sicily transform, knowing his kind will vanish, but refusing to rage against the inevitable. The film moved like a funeral march, beautiful and unstoppable. Visconti taught Scorsese that cinema could be literature, that a single shot could contain centuries of history. The ballroom sequence alone, 45 minutes of waltz and decay, influenced every party scene Scorsese would ever film. You can see it in the wedding scene in Goodfellas, the opera sequences in The Age of Innocence, and the casino floors in Casino. The Leopard showed Scorsese that movies could be about time itself, about how we carry the past, even as it slowly kills us. The film was operatic without being loud, tragic without being sentimental. For a filmmaker obsessed with the weight of tradition, it was like scripture. The film's meditation on change and continuity would echo through every Scorsese film about dying neighborhoods and vanishing ways of life. Citizen Kane, 1941. Every film student knows Citizen Kane is important, but for Scorsese, it wasn't about film school. It was about revelation. At 24, watching Orson Welles tear apart the American dream frame by frame, Scorsese realized cinema could be both entertainment and autopsy. Welles didn't just tell Kane's story, he performed surgery on it. The deep focus photography kept background and foreground equally sharp and equally important. The narrative jumped through time like memory itself. The way power corrupted not just morally but visually, each shot getting darker as Kane's soul shrank. Scorsese called Citizen Kane his graduate degree in filmmaking. The tracking shots in Goodfellas, the way the camera moves through the Copacabana like it owns the place, that's Welles' influence. The fractured timeline of The Irishman, jumping decades with a single cut, that's Kane's DNA. Citizen Kane taught Scorsese that every shot is a choice, that the camera doesn't just record the truth, but creates it. More than technique, though, Kane gave Scorsese permission to be ruthless with his characters, to love them and destroy them in the same breath. Sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't what happens to us, but what we become. The film's exploration of ambition as both salvation and damnation became one of Scorsese's central obsessions. Tokyo Story, 1953. Yasujiro Ozu didn't direct movies. He meditated with a camera. For Scorsese, a filmmaker who made his name with kinetic energy and volcanic outbursts, Tokyo Story was a masterclass in the power of stillness. The story was deceptively simple. Elderly parents visit their grown children in Tokyo, only to discover they've become strangers. No violence, no shouting, just the quiet devastation of time pulling families apart. Ozu shot it all from floor level, his camera as patient as a monk, watching life unfold with the inevitability of seasons changing. Scorsese called Tokyo Story the most profound film ever made about the passage of time. In a career built on movement, Ozu taught him that sometimes the camera's greatest power is knowing when to stop. You can see Tokyo Story's influence in the quieter moments of Scorsese's later work, the contemplative silences in silence, the way The Irishman lingers on faces weathered by decades of choices. Even in his most violent films, there are pockets of stillness, moments where the camera just breathes. Ozu showed Scorsese that silence could be louder than screaming, that the spaces between words could say more than dialogue ever could. Sometimes the most devastating truth is the one nobody speaks. The Searchers, 1956. John Ford didn't just make westerns. He made American mythology. The Searchers was his darkest prayer, a film that worshipped the frontier while Expo, sing its rotten heart. For Scorsese, Watching John Wayne's Ethan Edwards hunt his kidnapped niece across Monument Valley, it was the first time he saw America's shadow made flesh. The story seems simple. A Civil War veteran searches for his niece, taken by Comanche raiders. But Ford's genius was in the spaces between heroism and hatred. Wayne's Ethan wasn't a hero. He was a racist consumed by obsession. His quest became more about vengeance than rescue. The film asked the question America didn't want to answer. What if our heroes are monsters? Scorsese called The Searchers the most influential film ever made, and it's easy to see why. Travis Bickle's isolation in Taxi Driver, his warped sense of mission. That's Ethan Edwards stalking through New York instead of the desert. The twisted patriotism in The Departed, the way violence becomes ritual, that's Ford's DNA. The Searchers taught Scorsese that cinema could examine the darkness in American dreams, that the most dangerous stories are the ones we tell ourselves about who we are. Ford shot it in Monument Valley, that cathedral of Western mythology, but he filled it with doubt. The landscape was beautiful, but the story was poisonous. For a filmmaker who would spend his career examining American violence, it was the perfect contradiction. Sometimes the most beautiful lies are the most dangerous truths. The Bicycle Thief, 1948. Vittorio De Sica didn't have a studio. He had the streets of Rome. He didn't have movie stars. He had real people carrying real pain. For young Scorsese, watching a father and son search desperately for a stolen bicycle, it was the moment cinema stopped being entertainment and became sacrament. This was the film that made him pick up a camera. The story was heartbreakingly simple. Antonio needs his bicycle to work. It gets stolen. He and his son Bruno spend the day searching, their dignity crumbling with each dead end. No Hollywood ending, no triumphant music, just the weight of ordinary desperation in a world that doesn't care. De Sica shot it with non-professional actors on actual Roman streets still scarred from the war. The neo-realist approach wasn't a style choice. It was survival. He couldn't afford artifice, so he found truth instead. For Scorsese, raised on the streets of Little Italy and watching his own father struggle to provide, The Bicycle Thief felt like looking in a mirror. The Catholic guilt, the father-son dynamics, the way poverty makes heroes of ordinary men, it was all there. You can see its influence in Mean Streets, in Charlie's desperate attempts to save Johnny Boy. You feel it in Raging Bull, in Jake's relationship with his brother, even in The Irishman, in Frank's quiet loyalty to his family. The Bicycle Thief taught Scorsese that cinema could find the sacred in the ordinary, that the smallest human moments could contain the entire universe. Sometimes the most profound stories are the simplest ones. These 7 films didn't just teach Scorsese how to make movies. They taught him why movies matter. Not the obvious choices, but the necessary ones. The films that whispered secrets about time, obsession, and the weight of being human. They shaped not just his technique, but his soul, turning a kid from Little Italy into one of cinema's greatest storytellers. Now you know what shaped the master. The question that remains is, what shapes you?